right, well, thanks. Welcome back, everyone, and welcome to our panelists. We're so excited to have you here. I know you come from near and also from far. Mo, thank you so much for joining us all the way from London. Why don't we start with just telling us a little bit more about yourselves? John?
Sure, yeah, I can go first. Can everyone hear me okay? Thumbs up? All right, awesome. So I'm John Borman. I'm from Capital One. I am the head of what we call fraud data innovation at Capital One. You can think of that as a small little startup that we've carved off within the walls of Capital One. I've been at Capital One for about 10, 11 years, primarily focused on fraud in the last 3, and really excited to talk to you guys today.
Amazing. Mo?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay as well? Good. My name is Mo Bameke. I am the Chief Compliance Officer of Flutterwave. Flutterwave is a payment technology company headquartered in San Francisco, but majority of our business is in Africa, trying to build out the payment infrastructure and rails in Africa. I'm responsible for all things compliance, risk, fraud within Flutterwave. Ensuring that Flutterwave meets all its regulatory compliance obligations across all of our operating jurisdictions. Joined Flutterwave about 3 years ago from JP Morgan, where I did similar roles. Was in JP Morgan for about 8 years. Prior to JP Morgan, I worked in New York with Deutsche Bank.
Thank you, Mo. And so we have a lot of people from a lot of different industries here today, as well as different countries around the world. Why don't we start by, from your point of view, how are you seeing the world of payments changing? Let's start with Mo.
Cool. With the democratization of payments, with everyone having access to payments, the world of payments has really, really changed and grown. And we even saw that even more during COVID-19, where we saw, I think I was looking at one of the World Bank data, and it was like 40-50% of adults within developing nations, did their first e-commerce or their first digital transaction. And that shows you how much change the world of payment has gone through. And which is what we're also doing, in Flutterwave and also other fintechs around the world, is ensuring and enabling, businesses, enabling, small businesses, individuals to be able to accept payments and get paid. And this has led to growth in, new and alternative payment methods like wallets, like PayPal, like mobile money, and so on. So the world of payments, has really grown and has helped to support the growth and digitization of the world. I think it was folks at JP Morgan that said payment is eating the world, and it is really eating the world. And there's a lot of work to do to ensure that growth, because I think that's the next level from a payment perspective.
Yeah, and we were actually talking this morning at breakfast, right, that the way you can digitize and accept payments for, say, somebody in Lagos, where you don't have necessarily access to a URL for your network or for your business, so you're conducting your business on WhatsApp, and then you're sending payment details through WhatsApp to your customers, is very different than, say, somebody here where you can stand up an e-commerce shop in minutes, right, and be able to have a digital presence. So yeah,
absolutely, because when I was talking about digitization, it's payment has enabled digitization in various forms. The development and the growth of fintechs, in developing nations has also led to a lot of innovation within the payment space, where you don't have a bank account, your merchant or the person you're trying to buy something from only has access to a bank account, right? With the development and growth and change in the payment sector, you can make that payment through your card for it to land to that person's bank account without actually having a bank account. It gives you also all forms of alternative, all forms of options to be able to allow that merchant, who might not necessarily have a URL, like you said, might be a WhatsApp merchant, to get paid, and for you to be able to make that payment and get the goods that you want as well. But obviously, with that change comes with a lot of problems as well, like fraud and data sharing and all sort of information.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one topic that we're going to talk about a lot more today, which is going to be data framework, sharing data, how can we all together work so that we can actually help our customers and also stop fraud? So John, from your perspective, how do you see the world payments changing?
Yeah, I think my experience is a little different than Mo's. Capital One is primarily a US-based issuer. The thing that I'm seeing in the payment space that really haven't seen in 2 or 3 years or really even longer is just an immense amount of innovation in what we can collectively do as a group in the payment space, whether that's things like tokens, data sharing, making the chargeback process better or gone entirely. The amount of innovation that's happening within the payment space, even for a more mature market like the United States, is really incredible. And you sort of pair that with, pretty demanding consumer expectations these days. I think COVID-19 really accelerated a set of trends that we all expected to happen, maybe not as quickly as they did. So you sort of couple the innovation with changing customer dynamics, and it's really like making the next few years in payments really exciting. And you're starting to see a bunch of different groups come together to solve challenges that historically we didn't, right? You've got issuers working with merchants, working with PSPs, and sort of like everyone across the ecosystem trying to get at a better outcome together.
Absolutely, and that's something that we're going to also touch upon in a little while. How can we actually help solve some of these particular issues? We'll talk a bit about chargebacks and emerging payments as well. Going back to Flutterwave Mo, so we know that over the last years, and also for our audience to know, Flutterwave has been really expanding to the point that you're the largest PSP in Africa with over 200,000 merchants, correct? So can you just share a little bit more from your point of view? Why is it so important to share data for the benefit of your customers, but also for fighting fraud?
Yeah. So the work that Flutterwave is doing is to enable the average person in a developing nation to have access to payments, to be able to get paid, and also for them to pay, globally, which wasn't possible in the past. Like I mentioned before, that comes with issues as well, and solving that issue, or at the heart of solving that issue, is data. At the heart of minimizing fraud is leveraging the data that we get or that we have. Within our own ecosystem, we can use our data. We can use it. We use the data that we get from our merchants, from our own little ecosystem, to improve customer experience, minimize fraud, improve compliance, improve due diligence. But there's still a lot of work to be done when you look outside of the ecosystem of our, even from a jurisdictional perspective to a global perspective. There's still a lot that can be done, from managing data and leveraging data as well. So, and I think, what the key from my perspective to developing the next stage in the development of payments is having access, secured access to data, decentralizing data and information across every player within the ecosystem. And I think that's going to unlock the next stage of payment development across the world. It is true that we can truly have, the world feel as one through payments. It's only through that we can, that from a real-time perspective, be able to make real-time decisions to improve customer experience, to either optimize sales, improve my compliance, improve my due diligence, reduce fraud, and also help regulators to regulate as well. So we've tested from a Flutterwave perspective, we've tested that within our ecosystem, and we see that it works. We've got multiple products, and what we've been able to do is to take data from one product, apply it to another product, and drive security within our ecosystem. When I look at that data, all I can imagine is, what if, I have this data globally? What if that data is open to the world? Obviously, that's the concerns like privacy and like we heard earlier. But the opportunities is endless. But I think it will help unlock development in the next stage of payment around the world.
Yeah. So secure, democratic access to data for the benefit of all our customers, as well as the compliance side and our merchants as well. John, I know that from your side, you have some very clear and interesting views as to how the issuing side can actually take the same concept of data sharing for the benefit of customers. Can you share a little bit more of the work you're doing at Cap One?
Yeah, absolutely. I would describe myself as maybe a data sharing zealot. It's probably not the most charitable word to use, but it's true. I believe in an ecosystem that has open data sharing across the entire payment landscape, and critically free data sharing across the entire ecosystem. And if you think about this, like you can actually use this to drive a set of solutions that are better for customers first and foremost, better for merchants, and better for issuers. If you think about the role of an issuer in this, right? Our goal is to approve as many transactions as we can for customers while also protecting them from fraud. If you think about a merchant's goal, it's to approve as many transactions as they can while also limiting fraud. The goals are the same. What's missing is sort of the data connection between the two. Maybe just to use a quick example, if you think about the type of information that an issuer has when we're trying to make a decision around, hey, should we approve or decline this transaction? There's very limited information that we actually know about the transaction itself. We might know the name of the merchant category, and maybe how much the customer is spending. We use that, we compare that against like, hey, Mo is trying to buy something. What does Mo's shopping patterns typically look like? But beyond that, we don't have any of the information about the transaction itself. If you think about the decision a merchant is making or a PSP is making, they know everything about how a customer is interacting with the website, what might be in their cart, what IP address, browser they're using, all of this really rich and powerful information. But they don't know anything about, is this card valid? What type of activity do we typically see on this card? The type of information that is used for both the merchant and the issuer is totally different. What we've seen is simply by connecting those two things, you can get to dramatically better outcomes, really at no cost. So one of the products that Capital One has built and has partnered with a bunch of PSPs, Forder has been an amazing partner in this, is the ability to share real-time transaction data. What we've seen from this solution is on the Capital One side, we're actually able to reduce 40% of our false positive declines while stopping 15% more fraud. And we really think we're just scratching the surface of this. I think one of the keys to solutions like this is figuring out how do we actually make this scale? How do we share data outside of the networks in a way that scales? And how do we do it in a way that's safe and great for customers as well? And so, Forder's been a great leading edge partner on thinking through these problems, helping us drive better outcomes for merchants, ultimately to get to an ecosystem where simply by talking to each other, we can do what's best for both parties.
And it's interesting because pretty much we've been talking all morning about the value of sharing data and information, and yet it's not as common as we all wish that it was. So can you share a little bit more of what do you think are some of the barriers that are maybe slowing down the adoption of these data sharing frameworks that we all think that are really good for customers and for merchants? Maybe start with Mo?
Excuse me. So for the market we operate in, one of the greatest challenges we have is, for us, every market, every jurisdiction in Africa is quite different. And it's the same across the developing countries that we work in outside of Africa. So there's a lot of barriers to cross in that perspective. But like I said, talking to regulators, some regulators, across the markets as well, there's that desire, to look at how they can aggregate data in the safest possible way. And I'm bringing industry players. Not everyone. It was very interesting to hear John and Capital One being very interested in sharing data. Not every issuer is that way. A lot of them are close, and I can understand why. Working for an issuer as well, I can understand why you want to protect the data. But it's only through having as much data and information that we can truly protect the ecosystem that, and also some of the work that Forder is doing as well. And it goes a long way to help break that barrier. It helps to create that network. It's through that network effect that it can truly help to transcend some of the issues and some of the barriers that we see within the ecosystem. But like I said, there's still a lot of work that can be done in terms of breaking that barrier. But we just have to keep going at it and trying, and encouraging everyone, both those within the traditional payment side and those within the alternative payment side, to come together to break that barrier and share information that can truly help to grow an average business in developing sector that can help the world feel as one through payments. I think there's a lot of opportunities there. Though those barriers might seem hefty now, but I think they are breakable barriers. And through collaboration, through this kind of work that Forda is doing as well, those barriers can be broken.
And I agree with you. It's continuing the conversation, talking to more issuers, convincing others of the value of these shared data frameworks. John, I would love to know what do you think from that?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. To me, I see like 3 current barriers to scale, all of which are solvable. The first one is price. I mentioned that these solutions need to be free. You can probably get me talking for an hour about all of the problems that are existing in the 3DS market today in the United States. But the biggest one is that it costs money. For data sharing to be effective, it needs to be free. And everyone benefits. There's a huge revenue upside to it. But number 1 is price. Number 2 is scale, right? And that's where I think partners like Forda can actually help drive that on the issuer side. But more issuers outside of Capital One need to have similar solutions. Because as a merchant, I want all of my payments to benefit from these solutions, not just Capital One, which is going to be a meaningful sliver of your transactions, but you're going to want it for everything. And so we need to get more issuers on board with this. And lastly, I think it's sort of the regulatory and privacy environment. For the solution that Capital One has already built today, it's compliant with all of the existing privacy regulations across every geography that we have. But even despite that, there's still quite a bit of hesitation, I'd say, from merchants for participating in these programs, right? No one wants to be caught on the wrong side of a decision like that. If I zoom way out and I think about information sharing for the purposes of consumer benefit, these solutions really are really powerful from a consumer perspective. If I'm a consumer, I want my transactions to be approved and I want to be protected from fraud. The best way that we can accomplish that is through data sharing. We've sort of hit the ceiling of the improvements we can make from better modeling techniques, better data science, better AI. The next huge leverage point is data sharing. And if that's the best way to drive consumer benefit, we need to find a way to do that within the constraints of our existing regulations. And we believe that we've done that on Capital One side.
Yeah. And that's a really interesting point because we've touched upon consumer experience and acceptance, right, for both merchants and customers. But we're also starting to talk about there's a very big hidden cost to all of this when there's no data sharing framework. So John, maybe can you share a little bit more from your perspective? What are some of the costs that you think could be resolved or at least optimized if we were, or more issuers in the industry were to adopt these free data sharing frameworks?
Yeah, I think there's a stat out there. I think it might be a LexisNexis stat. It's something like for every $1 of fraud that a merchant experiences, there's something like $3 of cost to actually manage through that, whether that's the chargeback process, representment, all of those things, lost sales. So there's a pretty big cost across the entire ecosystem. On the issuer side, if a customer calls us and says hey, I didn't purchase this thing, right? We have to send them a new card. We're going to lose purchase volume on that. On the flip side, if we decline them for a transaction, they're just going to pull out a different card. And so there's huge costs across the entire ecosystem. Don't even get me started on the chargeback process. I think merchants will be surprised to hear this. Issuers hate chargebacks too. I've never ever found a topic in my career that is so universally loathed like the chargeback process. And so I actually think that merchants, issuers, and PSPs are allies together. We actually have the same goals, and there's ways to accomplish what I would call win-win-win outcomes across all 3.
Absolutely. Mo, from your point of view, from the merchant side, hidden costs?
Yeah, from a payment facilitation perspective, merchants and acquiring perspective, when I look at developing nations, right, or developing countries where we operate in, it's massive for a very small merchant, right, who's just trying to sell. The cost is huge. It's lost sales, right? It's not even about the lost sales, the process. We're talking about, internet in some of the developing countries as well, right? In order to be able to accept or decline that chargeback, he has to buy data to log in, to fulfill that process. And that costs money, Data in some of the developing countries is very expensive. So there's a lot of, not just cost, I don't even look at the cost to us, I look at the cost to our consumers, to our customers, and how, the chargeback process does impact them. And that's, and that's something that the whole ecosystem don't think about sometimes, especially for a company like us where we're trying to connect the world to developing countries in Africa and across the globe. Is those hidden costs do take sales away. It takes livelihood away from some people. It's led to people to go back to cash, right? Because they just think it's easier. If I collect cash, I don't have to deal with that rule, or I have to respond in 2 days or what have you. So those costs are really real for people whose margins are very small. When we look at it from a business perspective, the amount of time and effort to put into the chargeback process, as an example, the amount of time and effort to put into fraud management because you don't have access to one information. You install a fraud tool. The fraud tool can only get data within your ecosystem because you can't share data across board for one reason or the other, or maybe an issuer is not willing to share that data or information. It just takes a lot of time. It creates poor customer experience. When I look at my example as well, I travel quite a lot. And I always go through this where, I'm traveling and I want to make a payment and then I forgot on my bank I'm traveling and all my transactions get declined because, they figured out I'm somewhere in Africa and probably someone stole my card. So I have to spend, for me, it's a lot of effort trying to call my bank. Oh, hey, that's if I have mobile network. I'm traveling, accept my transactions, right? But if they had data, access to data, even from the telco, they will know I'm actually traveling, I'm in Africa, right? It's not like someone is stealing my card. So the costs are enormous, and I think there's a lot of work that can be done if information is shared across ecosystem, telcos, PFs, issuers. There's a lot of savings to be made.
Absolutely. So costs that inflate the very thin margins that small businesses already have, that then brings them back into the preference of cash, then just creates even more barriers and also limits some of the reach that they can have. So
yes, absolutely.
All very real.
Yeah.
So I think I saw a lot of people in our audience nod when we started talking about chargebacks, how much we love to hate them. So I actually would love a raise of hands. How many of you have started thinking about the new visa regulation 3.0 of new compelling evidence? 1, 2, okay, some. Okay, so for everybody else, starting April next year, there's going to be some change in regulation that if you have some previous transactions that have some consistent data points, in theory, you could help shift the liability of your newest chargeback. This is something that's brand new, but I would love to know from your point of view, what do you think of this update from the Visa Network? Can we start with John?
Sure, yeah, happy to start. I think it's a great step in the right direction, right? We all want to eliminate whatever term du jour we're calling friendly fraud or payments abuse or any of those things. So I definitely think it's a step in the right direction. But I think it's really just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more we can do. And simply by exchanging information and making it free, we can really, really get rid of a ton of chargebacks from the system. Just like using a quick example, if you think about like the existing chargeback process today, let's say a chargeback goes over to a merchant. The merchant either then has to have somebody go in, upload all of this data that they already have and put it into a document, or they have a PSP that's sort of automating that process. But taking their data, putting it into a document to send over to the issuer. As the issuer, we get this document, a PDF document, and we have to have a human go in, read it, extract information. We've invested heavily over the last 3 to 5 years in OCR technology to automatically read the documents and pull out the data. We both have the data. Both party needs the data. The whole document piece is a huge waste of time, and it's completely inefficient. And it's just slowing down the decisions that we're trying to make on both sides. And so we're focused so much on the operations of these things that we haven't actually defined a smart set of rules that says this is when the customer is actually responsible for this purchase. What I found just from listening to calls and my experience in the industry is the vast majority of this stuff is just customer confusion. There's not actually a ton of bad intent here. But as an issuer, I don't have the right data and information to clear that up for a customer. And so if we could just share that information, we could get rid of a huge chunk of this out of the ecosystem. So I really like the compelling evidence stuff, but it's maybe like a baby step in the right direction.
So small steps in the right direction. Mo, from your point of view on the merchant side?
Yeah, I feel the same. I don't think it's too much of a difference to what we currently have, but I think it's a step in the right direction to give the merchants a chance and to help reduce friendly fraud, which actually does cost a lot of the merchants a lot.
Agreed. So the other, I think, recent regulatory change is that earlier in October there was a sunsetting of 3DS.1 into 3DS.2. We started talking about this, but I would love to know more. So, John, from your perspective, what is your take on the 2.0, and are you using it, and how are you using it today?
I'm gonna have to pick my words carefully, I think, for this section. The underlying concept behind 3DS, information sharing across the merchant and issuer ecosystem for better decisions, I think is a really great and noble end state goal. But where I become frustrated, I think, is more in the implementation itself. There are certain design decisions on the existing use of 3DS that I think just create the wrong incentives in the ecosystem. First and foremost, it costs money. If you're a merchant, you're only going to want to use this for your riskiest transactions, right? I think at one point, my numbers are going to be a little bit fuzzy, but at one point, 3DS transactions represented 1% of Capital One's total purchases and 15% of our fraud losses. So, we're the issuer. What do you think we're going to do? We're going to decline the heck out of that. If you were a merchant and you saw, a pocket of fraud that was 1% of your transactions and 15% of your fraud, you'd decline that too. And so I think the devil's really in the details. The existing implementation of 3DS is such that there's just not the right incentives into the ecosystem. One of the other interesting things is we started to interrogate the data that actually lives in the 3DS message. There's actually not much there. Right? There's not a lot of information that's being shared. It's really pretty simple stuff. So as the issuer, I'm not actually getting the really rich data that would be helpful for me to drive better decisions. And so I think the spirit of it is good. There's a lot of work to be done on the actual details itself.
Yeah. So I started hearing this theme of a lot of good steps in the right direction, but maybe still a lot of road to travel. More from that perspective, how would you like to see this evolve?
Yeah, I think there needs to be a combination of the work that the networks are doing around 3DS, 2.1, 2.2, and more data sharing, like we've said. I think a sole reliance on 3DS is expensive. I don't think it still creates that incentive to decline transactions, even if they might not be fraudulent. But imagine if you take that, 3DS and combine it with decentralized data that is accessible to everyone, then we can make better decisions. I don't know, I get quite a lot of, especially when I don't have access to mobile. If I don't have access to my mobile, then I can't do any transaction. Or if I don't have access to internet, I don't have any access to transaction. But imagine if I'm trying to do a transaction, I don't have access to data, but my bank can then use access to data to decide whether that transaction is fraudulent or not, or whether I'm the one actually doing that transaction. Then we can have better success rates. A lot of our e-commerce merchants can, create value for their customers, for their users, and also have better conversion rates and generate revenue and improve customer experience. I think there's a lot of work to be done. I think it's still being looked at in silo. I think a lot of conversation is being had with issuers in the separate room from payment facilitators and what have you. I think everyone needs to come together and come up with a more innovative solution.
So I think if we were to wrap up our session with themes, it would be lots of really good steps in the right direction, a lot of opportunity from a data sharing perspective, Absolutely. And still a lot of road to travel. So I think with that, it's the end of our time. Thank you both so much for coming. Thanks, everyone,
Thank you.
for listening to us today.